Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. My name is Brenda Parker. I am the African American Interpretation and Special Projects Coordinator here at historic George Washington's Mount Vernon. I am so excited to present to you and bring to you today the story of a wonderful, wonderful, exciting family here in our American history. I'm going to introduce to you Judge Ruliman Quander, and he is going to talk about his upcoming book. As well as, of course, what the book is based on is his long family legacy. Um, Before I get started, I wanted to read you just a tiny, tiny intro from his book and explaining himself. He says this book was more than 50 years in the making. It was initially conceived as a family history. However, as more people, both nationally and internationally, became aware of the Quander's history, I was urged to tell the story, one truly reflective of American history. I love that. Now I present to you Ruliman Quander.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I am delighted to be here. I am Rohulamin Quander, and it is indeed a humble honor and a privilege to be here and be with you this afternoon. First and foremost, it's imperative as I talk about the Quander family history to understand that this is not a just Black history or African American history, but rather a facet of American history. I thought there was going to be a slide. It didn't come up, but let's see. There it is. So we, the Quanders, we don't claim to be the oldest African American family in the original colonies. So, but unquestionably, we are certainly one of the oldest such families, first noted in Maryland and in Virginia in the 1670s. It wasn't even a country yet, just colonies. Now, the Quander surname, there we are, the Quander surname and legacy is found in Maryland in the 1670s. And but the specific document, the original of the document, has never been located, still looking for it. But a list that lists the names of the families that were present does have our name on it. So as we begin here looking at this, preserving an American legacy, this is where we will start. Now, the documented history of the Quander family. When we say documented, we mean exactly that particular document. The documented history of the Quander family dates from a will written in 1684 by a man named Henry Adams. He was a Charles County, Maryland resident who migrated from England in 1639. And in this will, he provided for the freedom of his enslaved young man named Henry Quandeau, and a woman named Margaret Pugg, P-U-G-G, who would later become Henry's wife later on. So he bequeathed in the will a cow, a chest, farm tools, and everything contained in it. Now, when he died in 1686, Henry and Margaret then became free. And they subsequently married. I don't know if it was a ceremonial marriage or common law, whatever. And they had 4 children that we know of: Henry II, Margaret, Henry and Margaret had 4 children: Henry II, Mary, Victoria, and Elizabeth. And they began to make an everyday life for themselves in Charles County, Maryland. And in the early 1700s, there were several court matters referring to Mary and Victoria who were being prosecuted for bastardy. That's not a very nice term, but that's what it was called, for having children out of wedlock. While who the exact fathers of the children was not necessarily identified as Caucasian, the children were referred to unceremoniously as, quote, mulatto bastards. So that tells us that the fathers of the children were white men. Now, not going into details, but it is clear from that reference that interracial sex and interracial relationships were very much in evidence and have been in this nation since 1619, when the very first enslaved Africans arrived here in shackles down in Fort Monroe area of Virginia, in the Hampton Roads area. So I think that's important for you to understand. Now, established here in 1695, Ignatius Wheeler who was of Charles County, Maryland. You've heard of Wheeler Road, of course. He was a landowner. He deeded a tract of land called Wheeler's Folly to Henry Quandeau for 99 years. So it would go down and extend to Henry Quandeau's descendants. Now, the land initially came from King Charles I of England in about 1632 to the Lords, Baltimore. And then after that, it went to the Wheelers, and then subsequently a piece of that large tract of land was deeded over to the Quandeau family. So
Judge
the
Quander?
family was holding that land for a period of time. Now, you note the name today is Quandeau. Today is Quander, but initially it was not reflected as such in the writings of early Maryland. So you look right there and you see the various spellings and history of the name. So it apparently comes from Ghana, West Africa. The variations of the name, as you see them on the screen there, Amaquando, Amaquanda, etc., Amunquando, Quando O, Quando OE. And what we believe happened is back around 1800, when a census didn't quite understand what the name was, they dropped the O and made it ER. How we think it became Q in the first place, QU, from oral history, we believe that when the enslaved forebear was asked his name and replied, "I'm Quando," to untrained ears, they probably heard, "I am Quando," and it became just as you see it. I am Quando at the end, and I am Quander as it is now. So this is a common source as a Fonte name, the Fonte language not being written until the 19th century. So the KW of the Akan language and the QU of the English Anglo languages is the exact same pronunciation. And the Amaquando ancestors, having been there and met with them and discussed this, they are a group of people, the Fontes, who migrated from the Abyssinian highlands across Africa between 900 and 1100 AD. And when they couldn't migrate anymore, they had to stop because they were at the ocean, and they settled in the area which it became Ghana in the 1950s, Gold Coast, as we were calling it, Gulf of Guinea area. And that is basically where they came to settle. And we, the American Quanders, are their descendants, according to our faith and belief. And we have had the opportunity to relate to them. They have come to, some of them have come to visit us. Some of us have gone to visit them. We'll talk about that in a little bit, in a few minutes. Now, as I go forward and break the story down chronologically, I want you to follow me carefully, because I'm going to switch back and forth between Maryland and Virginia. Because if you know the geography of the area, you know we've got the Potomac River in the middle. I bet you thought it was called the Potomac. Well, it was the Potomac back in that day, and it's still the Potomac, although we call it the Potomac. So they were on both sides of the Potomac River. So I will go back and forth and try to keep it clear. So you'll be confused, but I don't want you to be too confused. So in 1741, and one of the Henry Quandos, who's either the son or the grandson of the original, sued a man in Charles County claiming that there was a debt owed as a result of a construction project that Quando had done and hadn't been paid for. Well, the foreman of the jury was a man named John Hanson. And if you know your early American history, you will know that later, under the Articles of Confederation, that John Hanson in 1781, that's 40 years after the case, became the first president of the United States of the Articles of Confederation under Congress assembled. That was before George Washington. George Washington was the president of the current system of government, but we had another one called the Confederation before that. And John Hanson was the president. Now, winning that suit was very important, because not just the suit, but the spirit, the entrepreneurship, the nerve of standing up and demanding that you were entitled to a certain right. That is all part of what was very important. And for us in subsequent Quando generations, it showed us that even our forebears spoke up, spoke out, stood up for what they thought was right. So therefore, recognizing that they did go forward with that suit was very, very important. And we are left to understand and interpret and to build our legacy upon what some of the forebears did. And this is but one example. Now, speaking of George Washington, Over time, as you well know, George Washington held enslaved Africans at Mount Vernon, and he grew up with that life and that circumstance. And over time, though, his attitude towards enslavement changed. He was particularly influenced by the bravery and focus of Black men, enslaved and free, during the American Revolutionary War, and he said so. So later, under the terms of his will, he decided that he would manumit, which means free, those who were enslaved to him. But he postponed their ability to actually leave the Mount Vernon and other properties that he owned until Martha Washington died, because he didn't want to create a situation of great confusion, letting his go and hers that she brought with her when she came as part of the Custis Dandridge dower. So he postponed their ability to leave until Martha died. Martha was terribly afraid that she was going to be murdered in her bed, and she said so, both in writing, and she communicated that to other people. So she decided to let them go, to release them effective, the ones under her control, effective January 1st, 1801. Now, it needs to be clarified here because a lot of people say that she freed them. No, she did not free them. George Washington freed his under his will, postponed until Martha died. Martha released those that were under her control, and by releasing them, that means they went back to the Custis family. They were not freed. And another day, another story, some of those enslaved people subsequently and their children and grandchildren ended up being enslaved to Robert E. Lee, because Robert E. Lee's wife, Mary Ann Randolph Custis Lee, was Martha Washington's great-granddaughter. And a couple of 3 generations down, they were still enslaved, but they were at a different place. I just wanted to clarify that particular point. Now, among
Judge
those,
Quander?
yes,
Judge Quander?
yes.
Okay, let's do a quick summary. You're brilliant. I just love your brain. Absolutely
I
love your brain.
graduated from Howard University, that's why.
There you are. Go Bisons. So, all right, getting back to the beginning. So the Quander family originally came into possession of land that was given to a colonist over here that was basically part of a land grant.
Correct.
Is that what you were saying?
Correct.
And so they came into possession of that land, control of that land for 90 years, did you say?
Well, the land grant was from King Charles I
Yes,
and
it went
to the Lords Baltimore.
Yes.
The Lords Baltimore sold subsequent parcels. And the
Yes.
Wheeler family, and those who are in the area know Wheeler Road, they had a large portion of that land, and they subdivided some of it. And part of it, 99-year lease of a piece of that land, went to Henry Quandeau in 1690.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's absolutely amazing. So in 1695, before the 17th, well, in the 17th century, in 1695, they were landowners, they were property owners.
Well, you see, a leasehold of 99 years was not an ownership, but it was a freehold. And it meant, we don't know for sure, but if you had a freehold, you could vote, because property
that was my next question.
Was a requirement. We have no indication of whether Henry could vote, but we believe he probably could.
Yes.
We haven't found any record to indicate one way or the other. Yes.
Yeah, that was my next question. Okay. And then the observance of marriage or unions between enslaved persons or free people of color. I don't believe that in the state of Maryland that it was even legally still recognized. And you're talking about, how we got to the cases of like Loving, versus, the state of Virginia, in modern times and our times and our memory and everything like that. But the simple classification of them still being not persons, not recognized as persons, is what hesitated or what kept, people from being legally documented as being husbands and wives.
Well, and that's why I said we have no reference of them being ceremonially married, if you understand that. They were, we would say, in a common law situation. Yeah.
Yes. And it's just because somebody else decided this is going to be the law.
That is true.
That's another thing that just really, really, it gets under my skin. But anyway, so you're talking about the next portion where you're saying that after, Margaret Pug and and your other ancestor, Henry.
Henry.
Henry, they were together. And then you go on quickly to the presidency before there was a presidency. Can you hit on that? Just a quick little snippet about
Okay,
that
well,
again.
under the Articles of Confederation, because we didn't
Articles of
have the
Confederation.
union that we have now, the states, if you know the definition of confederation, it means you come
Mhm.
together, but it doesn't have the cement of a
Oh,
federation. So a
yes.
confederation, each state was loosely associated, could go in different directions. And they started that around 1780, 81, and they
Mhm.
elected a new president. They had a meeting every year to elect a new person to preside over the Confederation. John Hanson was the very first one, and he was the president. If anybody knows John Hanson Highway, the other name for John Hanson Highway is Route 50, and it's now going out
Oh,
of business. We had John Hanson Federal Credit Union. So John Hanson was the first president, and he was from Maryland. And 40 years earlier, when he was a much younger person, he was the foreman of the jury that Henry Quando, when he was suing somebody. So I was saying that you're looking at here it is, somebody who was the first president of the United States under the Articles was the foreman of the Quando jury. So not only that, that's historically significant, but also significant is to look and see that Henry was standing up for right, for justice. And us coming
yes.
later, 200 plus years later, looking in those records, we see that our forebears spoke up, spoke out,
Yes.
demanded their rights. And there are other cases not talking about today, but there are other cases where they did not win. But the fact that they created a history, a legacy of speaking out, there were
Mhm.
hills to climb. There were stepping stones on the way to building pyramids. There were
Yes.
lemons on the way to making lemonade. So these are examples of family speaking up, speaking out. And it should be a lesson for African Americans to understand. We say, my people didn't do nothing. I've heard too many blacks say that, especially when I was coming along. I say, no, that's not true. Yeah, we're not all great basketball players and great stars. If they spoke up and they spoke out and they worked from can't see in the morning to can't see at night, they were building strong values and building a strong back so that you would have something to stand on later. So don't
Yes.
denigrate them, respect them, even if it wasn't the first black, this, that, or the other. They did something so that you are here today because of them. That's a
Amen.
typical example.
That
Yeah.
is so
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
Thank you again for pointing out the difference between emancipation and manumission.
Yeah.
Um, that was something that I also learned, and and as I learn things, I'm always excited to share them with other people.
All right.
So that made me
We
really
have three
excited
things
to
here.
point out the difference.
Emancipation is where, like with the Emancipation Proclamation,
Hmm. That's
manumission means to free somebody. So they are
yes.
connected. But the other one I used the term was released.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
like those who were at Mount Vernon were released by Martha Washington. But release meant that those who had been freed by George Washington, they were now free to go.
Hmm.
But
Yes.
those who were Herb Dower, they were sent back to the Custis family and they stayed
Yes.
enslaved. Yeah, until
Yes.
a later time. Okay. So
Yes.
continuing on, let me say this. We're talking about George Washington. They're right there. Among the released, because she was freed under Washington's will, was Nancy Quander. There you see in the holograph. We don't know what she looked like. But shortly after that, she married a free black man named Charles Quander,
Hmm.
thus introducing the Quander name to the Mount Vernon side and the Potomac, Mount Vernon and the Virginia side of the Potomac River. Now, the Quander relationship with Mount Vernon was established at that time and continues even now to today. So there's quite a bit of intersection with the Quanders and Mount Vernon. And one of those interconnections is a man named West Ford. You might have heard of West Ford. And of course, I mentioned Nancy Carter Quander was her name, and then the
Hmm.
Quander family together. Now, although not proven, indications are that Bushrod Washington, George Washington's nephew, was the father of West Ford, an enslaved man born of a slave named Venus and a quote unknown father, although we think we know pretty well who the father was. And that connection, if established, would render the blood connection between the Quander family and George Washington. Now, during this general time frame back on the Maryland side, because we're going back and forth, we had another thing going. And in that particular case, it was a circumstance, it was a landmark case on the Maryland side called Quando v. Claggett. Notice the spelling of Quando still there in that particular case. And in this case, an enslaved man, some records show him as Henry Quando and others as Harry Quando, was suing for his freedom. And there were many. I'm sorry that that's not clear, but that's the case. I'm not going to tell you about it. You couldn't read it anyway because it's too small. But this is the case where this man was claiming he got his freedom by will and that they wouldn't give it to him. And there was a big court case over the interpretation. But the significance of the case beyond being a case for manumission was that Francis Scott Key, and we know who Francis Scott Key was, Star Spangled Banner, he was Quando's attorney, and Judge Cranch, who was a judge who presided over the case and eventually gave him his freedom, was the nephew of President John Adams and the first cousin of President John Quincy Adams. And also, very importantly, Francis Scott Key was the brother-in-law of Chief Judge Roger Taney. Francis Scott Key's wife was Phoebe Taney. And Judge Taney, you know, was the author of that horrible Dred Scott decision. So it goes to show you how history and events are very often intertwined. So this is something to keep track of. Meanwhile, roughly equivalently on the other side of the river, there we are, we're back in Virginia. Remember, we're going back and forth across the river. The state of Virginia, when they manumitted, Maryland did the same thing too. They required those Negroes who were free to periodically register themselves. They didn't want a bunch of loose Negroes running all over the place. You understand my sarcasm, of course. I
Yes.
hope if you didn't, I'm being sarcastic. So the Negroes, the colored, that's the term of art at the time, were required to periodically register and re-register themselves. How insulting. Just like you register your dog so that you know he's gotten his rabies shots. But in retrospect, it was a blessing because the registration of free Negroes, and this is a book that were periodic registrations, it helped us to understand just who we were, where we were, what we looked like, maybe who gave us our freedom papers, who was our mother, who were our children, etc. So these registrations have proven over time to be a blessing in disguise. And one of those people that was listed was a Nancy Quander, who's the same as Nancy Carter Quander. She is listed as a member, as a person registered. And later on, we will see, and I don't have the newspaper article here, but later on, we will see Nancy Quander listed in a Alexandria Gazette newspaper of November 14th, 1835, where they were tending the grave of George Washington at Mount Vernon. And a reporter went out there and he listed the 10 men, including one of her sons-in-law. And they said, and Nancy Quander cooking for the men. Well, that was a domestic task. And she probably was a very good cook. I don't know. But she died, this is 1835. She died about 1853. And she is listed there as cooking for the men. So these are records to show and establish that there was an ongoing relationship and some symmetry between Nancy and the men and George Washington. Now, there are no surviving records of who is buried at Mount Vernon in the slave burial ground. If you've been there, you might know it. But in our oral history, we believe it's been passed down to us that of the roughly 155 estimated there, that Nancy Quander and her mother, Sookie Bay, are believed to be buried there, according to some of the older members of the family talking to me and others years ago, although there are no records except for, Frank Lee, who was one of George Washington's personal servants, that him being buried there because Washington mentioned it in his diary. But for the others, we don't know. Now, I know you've been wondering, well, now these Quanders are all over the place. Basically, we're one family, but we have 4 branches, and 2 in Maryland and 2 in Virginia. And it appears that the 2 in Virginia came out of the 2 in Maryland. We have the story of the 2 brothers brought here from the islands, probably Barbados, and they were separated when they got here. One got his freedom. One was enslaved by Henry Adams, got his freedom under the will. The other, whose name we don't know, but we carry the name Benjamin, was enslaved, and probably his descendants were the ones who got freed when freedom eventually came to everybody. But those 2 branches are in Maryland, and the 2 that are from Virginia apparently evolved and devolved from the 2 that are in Maryland. So it's important to understand that we are all connected. We're all one family, but we come from different branches. So this is how we speak in terms of Mount Vernon and that group that came out of Mount Vernon, all of us share the Quanda legacy, but all of us
Yes.
are not from the Mount Vernon group. That's just important for you to understand. Now,
Yes.
there,
And it's
Brenda,
all
do you have a
explained
question?
in the book. No,
Yeah.
I was saying that it's all so beautifully explained also in the book.
Yes, we're going to talk about the book. We haven't
Yeah.
forgotten, believe me. So now, in addition to there being 4 main branches,
Hmm.
there are also 4 Quanda streets. I bet you didn't know that. You've got
No.
Quanda Road. There it is right there, Route 1
Hmm.
and Quanda Road in the Springbank area of Fairfax County. Then there's
Hmm.
Quanda Street in Prince William County. There's Quanda's Promise in Bowie, Maryland. And the original one, the original Quanda, which was Quanda Alley then, now Quanda Street, is being restored in Washington, D.C. The street is there, and the council put it back. It disappeared during World War II when they expanded the United States Navy Yard. And they expanded the Navy Yard, and they took Quanda Street out of existence because they needed to build a building for the war effort. Well, the Council of the District of Columbia got the street back from the federal government, got the land, and Quanda Street has been cut through. There's no sign there, but there's active construction. And within the next couple of months in Washington, D.C., in 2021, there will be a rededication of Quanda Street with the physical placing of the sign. So there is going to be Quanda Street coming again. Now, this street here you're looking at, Quanda Road, along Quanda Road in Fairfax County, is the original 88-acre farm that Charles Henry Quanda, who was an enslaved man, founded, and he moved there to the Springbank area. Next slide. Moved there to the Springbank area in the 1870s, right after he got his freedom. And he is the first African American to settle there. I'm sorry that picture isn't very good, but it's a picture of a picture of a picture. But that is the part of the basis for this book here, because there are 2. This one is, you see him sitting on his buckboard, and that one he's standing. We'll come back to it in a few minutes. But he is the one who started the 88-acre dairy farm that ran from the 1870s and was retired in the 1960s. So this is he is the father of a large section of the family. And that land that he got it from the Downing family, but previously it belonged to George Mason VI. And if you know your Virginia and United States history, you know who George Mason was. So that land belonged to George Mason VI. Now, in 1926, the Quanda family in Virginia held their first Quanda family reunion. It was held in Woodlawn, Virginia, right adjacent to the Dog Run farm, which is part of George Washington's Mount Vernon plantation near the Woodlawn plantation. And the reunion started in 1926. I couldn't find the photo, but this is one of the 4 of the founders of 1938. They were at the 1938 reunion, but they were the ones who were the founders. Now, the man with the hat on, Tom Quanda, he worked at Mount Vernon. He was a gardener there for over 50 years. And as I'm told in the family, sometime he also served as a tomb guard. But when I discussed it with Mary Thompson, she said there's no record of him being paid as a tomb guard, but he did work there as a longtime gardener alongside our cousin, Mr. Holland. Forget Mr. Holland's first name, might have been Bill, but Mr. Holland, our cousin, it was William. Okay. So Tom Quanda worked there, serving as a tomb guard, I am told, periodically, but not paid as such, but a longtime gardener. And that's his sister on the right, the older lady. On his left, you're right, Susanna Quanda Napper. Okay, so that is part of the continuing legacy. So in 2010, the Quandas held their 85th Quanda family reunion at Mount Vernon at the invitation of the Mount Vernon Ladies Association. We had close to 200 of us, and this is just a picture of a few of us that we were walking around the property, and we just stopped for a photo. You see your handsomeness on the right with the green hat, and my beautiful bride standing in front of me in the very reddish blouse. That's Carmen. And the one in the pink red blouse on the left, that's my daughter Fatima. And the little girl, that's my granddaughter, Egypt. She's 16 years old. It's not a recent picture. But that particular cabin you're looking at is a reproduction. It was rebuilt down by the grist mill, right near the water. And I dedicated that particular farm along with Zuni Matima in 2007. You can't see the tree, but she and I planted 2 trees there on the other side. When I was discussing this with Brenda Parker, she said now in the old days, they wouldn't have had 2 exits. But when they built this reproduction, and as people go through, they want the people to keep the traffic flowing. So you come in the front, and this is the back. So people can go in the front, they can walk through and look through it. It has a loft, and come out the back. This is part of keeping things flowing. Now, still at Mount Vernon, in October 2016, Mount Vernon opened an exhibit. It's called Lives Bound Together, Slavery at George Washington's Mount Vernon. And many of the historic plantations have now taken a much different look at the institution of slavery, fortunately. And Mount Vernon was looking at it. I was a consultant on the exhibit, looking at enslavement from the perspective of those who were the enslaved. When George Washington died, he had 317 enslaved people there, of which 123 were his, and the others were between Martha's Dower and those who were rented from other places. So that's the entrance there. You see George Washington there on your left. You don't see it in the picture, but on the left is the entrance to the Educational Center. We're not going there today. And that's the entrance to that. So you go in there and you begin walking around and seeing the exhibit. So 19 of the 317, they dedicated it to those 19, had a little bit about those 19, and we're back there with Nancy. You don't know what she looked like, but there she is in the holograph, and there I am standing there. You touch that button, you get a little educational information about her and about slave life. She was at a River Farm, and if those of you who are in the Washington, D.C. area, you know River Farm was just up, the horticultural organization that owns it, just put it up for sale. And there's some concern about turning it into mansions. We don't know what's going to happen there. But River Farm was the farm next to Mansion House, just up the river, literally next to the water. And in the back, you'll see a little bit, there's a cousin Gladys Quantatassa. We're going to come to her in a minute. So this exhibit, besides the 19, it also features Gladys Quantatassa, cousin, who was the first African-American interpreter guide there, and she worked there for 35 years, 25 of them as a guide. And then you see her in her uniform and her tam and her name tag. And up in the upper right there, you see the green boxwoods. That is the memorial site itself. We're not talking about it so much, but the monument is right there that you see. The flat top is saying what the dedication is to those who served in that capacity. In that capacity of being enslaved there at Mount Vernon for all those years. So I served as an advisor to the exhibit. Now, here in the next slide, you'll see a group of family members. Every year we have, obviously, Black History Month events. So here we were at the 2018 one, and this was a Black History Month event, and the theme was We Return Fighting. So here we were at an event at, African Americans in Times of War. That's what it was. So Maryland National Capital Park and Planning featured World War I veterans, and a group of us went to the event. And here you see some of us who were posing for the picture, but as a representative of the fact that African Americans and Kwandas in particular have fought in the service and defense of this nation from its very beginning in the French and Indian War. So it is not unusual to find that we have served with distinction. Now, the Maryland and Washington, D.C. Kwandas, while not having formal reunions structured as such and by that name, like since 1926, we've been having family reunion gatherings even before 1926. And this particular homestead house you see, this is the home of my great-grandfather, my great-grandfather Gabriel Quander and my great-great-grandfather John Henry Quander. This house is in Upper Marlboro, Maryland, and it doesn't look like much, but it's still there, and it's on the Register of Historic Places for Prince George's County in Upper Marlboro, Maryland. And at this particular family home, there were many family reunions and activities that were held there. This house is 1875. And it's at 3708 Old Crane Highway in Upper Marlboro, Maryland. And denied full access to St. Mary's Catholic Church in Upper Marlboro, Maryland, a lot of the church-related activities occurred right here in this particular household. And because of race, they had to go and do their activities there instead of being able to go into the old church. And let's go to the next slide. This is the old church in St. Mary's of the Assumption Roman Catholic Church. The Maryland Quinders have a long history in Roman Catholicism. And I didn't mention it, but the will of Henry Adams referred to him as being a Catholic. And we think, we're not sure, that Henry Quandeau and Margaret Pug may have traced their Catholicism all the way to the late 1600s, because we have a very strong and proud legacy in Maryland, the Maryland Quinders being Catholic. And this particular church, St. Mary's of the Assumption, is the new church. And of course, new is a relative term. I think I'll have a drink of water. There we go.
Yes, he calls it the new church. I love how you call it the new church.
They called it the new church. And that's because the old church burned down. So this new church is 1898. And the new church, you see the archway on the right, the door, that was the colored entrance, because the colored had to go in that entrance. The colored had to sit in the back, and the whites would go in their entrance and go up to the front 2/3 of the church, and the colored had to sit in the back. So the colored went into that entrance, and a little bit to the left, you'll see an arched window. And that arched window was a window dedicated by the St. Mary's Colored Beneficial Society. So we can go and take a look at that window from the inside. There we are. There it is there, dedicated by the St. Mary's Colored Beneficial Society in 1898. And that was the vestibule of where we went. And in addition to the Colored Beneficial Society, we also had the Knights of St. John, a commandery number 74. And those two organizations overlapped in their purpose. They focused, we didn't have Social Security then, and this is after the Civil War. So they had to focus, they would stay with this building. They had to focus on burying the dead, feeding the poor, taking care of widows. And that's why those organizations, those beneficials were founded. And they got up a little money in 1892. This building they put together, it's been restored. You can see it. This building was restored. Let's go back to the other slide a minute. Right under the left, look under the archway, and you see the two columns there. The left one right behind it, you see a historical marker there. Now that historical marker, there it is, the next slide. It's on the Maryland Register of Historic Places. I believe it's been placed on the National Register also. And funny thing, when the church burned down in the early 1890s and they needed a place to go, they rented the colored facility across the street, and they held mass there until the church was rebuilt. And that's the historical marker there that was placed there. So that's where they had a lot of meetings. So you're looking at yes.
Can I ask you a question, Judge Quander?
Sure. Yes.
When they were in the new old church, the brick structure over there,
Yes.
I know it's a weird question. Did they actually offer sacraments separately as well?
It's a good thing you asked that question. I'm going to tell you two things. The answer is not separately, but separately. The way it was, and believe me, all of this is very symbolic, and I want you to understand this.
All right.
The front 2/3 of the church, was where the white people sat. The back third of the church is where the Negroes, colored, sat. We didn't call ourselves African American or Black, where they sat.
Yeah.
And all the whites would go to communion first.
All right.
And after they finished, now get the symbolism of this.
Yes.
They unhooked the chains.
Yes.
So the Negroes could go to take communion. Notice what I said.
Unhook the chains.
Now, those chains were enclosed in velvet, but you weren't fooling anybody. You weren't fooling anybody. So the symbolism was very much there. So we had to wait until the white people received communion before the Negroes could go. So that is very significant part of the history of the church. Yes, that's true. And we know racism, unfortunately, was everywhere. And unfortunately, racism still seems to be still everywhere. Okay. Yeah. So I just want you to understand that. So
thank you for explaining that. Thank you.
And I didn't mention it, but I want you to know, right behind the church, there's a parking lot. And next to the parking lot is Donald's Chance. And anybody who knows Prince George's County history also know that Donald's Chance is the oldest extant brick building in Prince George's County. And Henry Donald who was related to the Carroll family, and one or two of the Carrolls, who were Archbishop John Carroll and Charles Carroll and other famous Daniel Carroll. One or two of them was born in that house. So that's a very historic spot right there, yeah. So moving on, in 1983, under the leadership of my father, James W. Quander, we began planning the 300th anniversary of the documented presence of the Quander family. That was 1684, moving to 1984. So we planned it and we executed, and there we are at Howard University in the Blackburn Center. And that handsome guy with a head of hair, I wonder what happened. That's yours truly. And the organization was incorporated as the Quanders United. And therefore, we created a separate organization of the Maryland, D.C. Quanders. The Virginia Quanders are the Quander Family Reunion. The Maryland, D.C. Quanders are the Quanders United. And in last couple of years, we've moved towards merging into one organization, but that's a separate issue, but we are functioning in that way today. So at Howard University in 1984, which is that slide you're looking at now, we celebrated our 300th anniversary. And the event was captured nationally and internationally. Citations were received from President Reagan, the U.S. Congress, several governors, other elected officials. It was audio and visual, and the continuing history of that was validated afterwards when the Smithsonian called, maybe I should say Ebony Magazine, actually. It was several different articles, and there's one right there from Ebony Magazine, where they referred to us as America's oldest Black family. But remember, I told you, we call ourselves one of the oldest. We don't want to call ourselves the oldest and then find out that it's not true. So we don't say we are the, we say one of the. So that is the September 1984 issue of Ebony Magazine. And since then, during that period, a number of people came forward asking questions, and the Smithsonian came forward, and Dr. Bernice Johnson Regan, curator emeritus of the Smithsonian Museum of American History, she came forward with an interview program which was ongoing, and they interviewed a number of Quanders, and they also interviewed me and my father and so on. And by the time we finished it, we called it Telling Stories. I got a grant from the Humanities Council of Washington, D.C. And by the time we finished 41 interviews, we had 850 pages of interview material. And it's placed at certain places like Howard University's Moreland Spingarn Room, the Mormon Research Library in Salt Lake, the Washingtoniana collection of the D.C. Public Library, and several other places. And also, growing out of that, this exhibit right here that you're looking at, we had a creation of, there was the first of 4 times that we've been in the Smithsonian. And the first one was called After the Revolution, Everyday Life in America, 1780 to 1800. And because of COVID, I was not able to get any photograph from that. So what I did is I took another Smithsonian, which was that one you see. That's another one featuring the Quanders. So I used the picture from the second exhibit and it referenced the first one. But that picture you see there is Sadie Chin Quander, Chinn, of Quander Road. And now that oval picture is Frederick Douglass, because that exhibit, the second exhibit, we had the Smithsonian feature different people. And that the Sadie Chin Quander is the Quander family. The Douglasses participated. That's the oval that you see there. And it's hard to make it out, but that black typewriter was the typewriter of Buck Franklin. Buck Franklin was the father of John Hope Franklin and the grandfather of John Franklin, who works with the Smithsonian now. But Buck Hope Franklin, Buck Franklin used that typewriter as a lawyer and a journalist to report to the black press the burning down of Black Wall Street during Tulsa riots in 1923. So that's a very, very important piece of American history.
Wow.
So that is the significance of that particular typewriter. Now, the Quander Historical Society, now called the Quander Historical and Educational Society, was founded in 1984 to preserve, document, share, to preserve, document, educate, share, enjoy the legacy of our history within our family and also with the community at large. So we are a 501c3 education organization, and we are designed to do just exact purpose. So therefore, you see there where we were featured, and that's the slide that you're looking at. We've been at the Smithsonian 4 times. We're not there presently because when they opened the new Museum of African American History and Culture, they said, well, maybe we should give somebody else a chance. It was fine with me, but needless to say, some of the family members were a little upset because they thought, well, we should be in there. I said, yeah, that's right. And I have been told since then that we haven't forgotten about you. We'll get to you, but we're going to do somebody else first. And I said, that's fine. So that is the situation that we're in now. Now, let me say that this is a postscript to the tricentennial, because I hadn't mentioned before. This is helping us to realize that Alex Haley's roots, as important as it wasn't the only story. And his was based a large part upon fiction because he had some facts that he had to manufacture into narrative for a full book, which Roots is quite thick. If you have a copy of it, I got mine right over here. So ours is not that. Ours is based upon actual documents, events, court cases, and extracts from newspaper. We try to cut down on imagining, on suppositions. We put the emphasis, those 250 pages, the emphasis upon what actually did happen that is fully documented without enhancing it by this person said this, that person said that, unless we can get a quote from a newspaper or some other resource. So we understand, and I want you to understand that there is a difference and there is a reason why that is. But we still are approaching our 350th year. So as we move to the next slide, and we kind of remember that as we did this, we had to go to Ghana. It was important for us to do so. And here you see a picture of us. There I am in the center. My wife took this beautiful picture. I'm in the center, and the two people seated on the left, on your left, including the man with the striped red and white shirt and his wife. Those two, they just left here. They were here for several months from Ghana, from Cape Coast, Ghana. And we have been there. They have been here. We have others who have gone back and forth. And the thing about it, a lot of people have misconceptions about life in Africa. They think everybody is running around scantily clothed and living in a hut. Well, that's not true. And I've been to Africa 7 times and counting. And this house looks like any typically that you'd find in the southern part of the United States or in the Caribbean. And this was their home. And that's one of the places that we stayed on one of my 7 trips to Africa. And that's, but in addition to that, when we had our reunion here, some of them who were in New York also came down. Kwesi, whose name is also Joseph, and Kweku, whose name is Ernest Amkwando, they came down. They were part of the celebration. And my wife and I visited there, and the newspapers met us at the airport and showcased the Kwanda family history while we were there. And the next slide is a typical example of one of the, oh, there we are still in the village. Most of those people are related to me. We're in the village of Mpizadazi. Mpizadazi is a place where we don't know for sure where the ancestor Egir Edum Mkwanda, whether he is our direct ancestor, but those who are in that area are of that lineage. So we have the right family. We may not have the right individual. So there I am standing there. Notice I had hair then. I wonder what happened. But that was more than a few years ago. Okay. So when we got back, the article that appeared in the Philadelphia newspaper, the news, was just one. That's the next slide. Just one that was very typical of explaining that we had been there. And it was talking about the history and legacy of the family. And this is just one article. There were several newspapers and magazines that have been all around the country. Now, I have published 4 books over time, and I just published it. I am that handsome guy. That's what I look like, what's left of it. So I have been blessed and published 4 books, and I'll talk about them quickly. The first book was the Kwanda Quality, the true story of a black trailblazing diabetic. My father was, according to the doctors, not expected to live to be 10 years because of diabetes. He lived 86 years. And insulin saved him. And he always said diabetes is not a death sentence, but a challenge to live. And indeed, it was. There you see him in a Roman collar. He was an ordained Roman Catholic deacon in the Roman Catholic Church, continuing the Quanda family legacy. In the upper colorized photo, that's the family home. You can't see it, but that's Easter Sunday, 1930. He's there in his stovepipes. You can't see it. And here he is getting ready to do an invocation at a commencement. And he died in 2004. He was 86. And the money that we earned from that book, we gave $10,000 of it to the Howard University School of Medicine to enhance their medical training for things and seminars related to diabetes. And at the time we gave it, they give a party, Christmas party every year for diabetic children. And they took a portion of the money, and the treats and the games and the giveaway gifts, what have you, were given as a result of the donation from the Quanda family. So when they gave the party that year, they said that this party is courtesy of the late James W. Quanda. And so that particular year, they give it every year. So that was the first book. That was 2004. It came out in 2006. The second book that I did was Nellie Quanda, Alpha Kappa Alpha Pearl. Nellie Quanda, this AKA lady, was the first national president of the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. She was born in 1880 in Washington, D.C., died in 1961, graduated from Howard University in 1912. As I said, was the first national president of Alpha Kappa Alpha. She was also the lead incorporated pledge of sorority the second year. So that was the second book. The third one you're looking at, I'm a member of the Omega Psi Phi fraternity. And in 2014, I published my 50-year membership memoir. It's a memoir based on my life and also based on the principles of the Omega Psi Phi fraternity. I'm coming up to 57 years next week. And that building there is Thurkill Hall, where Howard University was founded in 1911. And that monument there is a monument to the founders. And that handsome guy with black hair was somebody that I used to be. And then one on the right is what's left. But guess what? You see, I can still fit in the same sweater. So I'm not doing too bad. And now the next book is the one that, next slide. Oh, no, we're coming to, I'm not there yet. I had mentioned, and I want you to, go back there, stay there. I had mentioned to you about the Quanda presence being a strong Catholic presence in Maryland. But I want you to understand our Virginia cousins are very much largely Baptist and Methodist. And here you see Alpha Street Baptist Church, which is one of the anchor churches of the Quandas of Virginia. And this church, not the building, but we have a membership affiliation, apparently goes back to about 1813. And this is the current sanctuary. You can't see it on the left, but the sanctuary that was built in 1855 is there on the National Register. So we have a very strong presence of Baptists and Methodists, and partly has to do with Maryland being a Catholic colony, Virginia being a Protestant, significantly Baptist colony in the old days. So this is why you see Alpha Street. I go there quite frequently, and I rolled past there a couple of days ago because I was over in that area. Okay, now the next slide now. All right, so as we wind down, we're going to see a section. I'm going to touch on a couple of things. Quandas and military service. We have a long history of military service, and I prepared that exhibit for a picnic we had a couple of years ago at Fort Lee Park, Quandas and military service. And let's go next. And we'll see that in this particular case, a few of the men, this is Nellie Quanda's father, Corporal John Pearson Quanda, and he is in his uniform in that 1915 picture. And he was a corporal in the war and was chosen as the keynote speaker in the Grand Army of the Republic reunion in 1915 to deliver a keynote address on behalf of the colored troops. There he is posed with that picture, 1915. He died in 1925, and he is buried at Arlington National Cemetery. We also have Tuskegee Airmen pilots, and here you see a picture. The one on the right is Charles Johnson Quanda. He's standing with other flight mates in front of their B-25 bomber in 1944. And there he is posed as they get ready to go up, or maybe they just posed for a picture, not sure. And they are, Tuskegee Airmen. And I might say on Saturday night, I will be one of the guest speakers at the 80th anniversary of the Tuskegee Airmen. They have an event, and I am one of the keynote speakers. That's already in the can, so that's been taped already. and I'll feature Charles Johnson Quanda among two others in the family. One other Quanda and one on my mother's side. All right. And there I am. We have, would you believe, we're very, very honored. That tall guy in the middle is me. We are distinguished. We are the only African-American family in the United States, and possibly only family in the United States, to have 4 generals. And here you see the 4 generals. The one on the left is retired. That's General Leo Brooks. The one to his right is General Vincent Keith Brooks. The one on the far right is General Leo Brooks Jr. And the one standing next to me on my left is General Mark Quander. General Mark Quander is the Commandant Designate for West Point. He will take over on May 1st. He will be the 3rd African-American to be the Commandant of West Point. And strikingly, the 2nd Commandant was our cousin, the one on the far right, Leo. Leo Brooks was the Commandant 2002 to 4. And someone whose name, General Gordon, I believe it was the first one. So we have the 2nd and the 3rd commandants of both Quanda family members. And on Monday, I'll be speaking about outstanding women of Fairfax County. And I'll be speaking about Nellie Brooks Quanda. That's another Nellie Quanda. And she is the wife. She's deceased. She's the wife of General Brooks on the left and the mother of the other 2 generals. So I'll be speaking about her on Monday night. That's sponsored by the Psi Nu chapter of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity. And that'll be a virtual on Monday. Okay, let's move on. And this is where we came in. This is where we're talking about the Quanda family legacy, the Quanda family history. And as we go forward, I'd like to go back and visit about the new book. It's called The Quandars Since 1684, An Enduring African-American Legacy. And there you see the cover of the book. And up in there's the same picture you saw him sitting down in the picture. My wife is a professional artist. Some of you may know that already. So she painted this picture. You see her signature in the lower right corner. And we call that picture from the White House, from the outhouse to the White House. And when you look at the picture there, you'll see in the right, there is the picture right there of the outhouse in the corner. And one of the slides that we came through earlier, we saw Gladys Quanda Tansel with President Clinton in the Oval Office and then Senator Robb and me. So this was her grandfather, and he was the one who settled on Quanda Road. And don't have a picture of his wife Amanda. There she is there, but she's looking to the side. So this picture was taken about 1915. Now anybody who's interested in obtaining a copy of the book, you can get it very easily. First of all, you can send an inquiry to me at my website, which you see there, or you can text me at 202-487-9922. You can also get it through the gift shop at Mount Vernon. They have the book there. And if you go on Amazon or other place, you can get it there too. The price is the same everywhere. But I'm not doing anything negative to anybody else, but if you get it from me, it'll be autographed and it will be stamped. It has a special stamp that goes in to my book that comes from me that you don't get if you get it anyplace else. Yeah. So those are the 3 places, and you can do that and get it from any of those 3 places. And I've enjoyed this. Hope it didn't take too much time. If there are any questions, I'd gladly entertain.
This has been absolutely wonderful. All right. I've been looking at the comments for a while now. Are you ready for some questions? Do you need to take a sip of water? Okay. Okay. All right. This is from, yeah, you can sip while I'm reading. From Tammy Marino. Thank you so very much for sending this question in. I've seen Quander items in the Lives Bound Together exhibit. Is there a Quander family library that houses other precious photos and artifacts from the history of all branches of the family?
The answer is yes. Well, that was part of the reason why the Quanda Historical and Educational Society was founded, to preserve, document, enjoy, savor, and etc. So we made a decision, and the Quanda archives, a few scattered here and there, but they are concentrated at the Howard University Moreland Spingarn Research Center. And of course, because of COVID, things are closed, but documents are protected there. And there are some things that are a little thicker than documents, but most of what in terms of writing is there. The tree that was in the Smithsonian, which is the Mount Vernon descendant Quandas. That tree was up there for 15 years. And when it was over, they came to me and said, we're going to give this to you. And I said, no, make it go over and put it at the library at Mount Vernon. So that tree, which is only the Mount Vernon descendant Quandas, that tree is there at the library.
That's beautiful. I didn't even know that. Thank you for asking that question, Tammy. That's wonderful. The next question is from DC Sobelson. The Wikipedia page on the Quander family claims that Henry established himself in Maryland to build a family and eventually became freed in 1864. Is that date correct?
No, the numbers are correct numbers, but the order is wrong. It's 1684. And what happened, Henry Adams, who we assume is the namesake for Henry Quando, Henry Adams wrote a will in 1684. And under the will, he provided for the freedom of 2 of his 4 enslaved. And Henry Quando and Margaret Pug. And then the other 2, he deeded over to his goddaughter. And then Henry Adams died in 1686. So they got their freedom in 1686, but they were referenced in the document of 1684. So that Wikipedia is wrong. The numbers are right, but in the wrong order.
Yes. That's covered like in the first couple of chapters in the book. So yeah. Another reason why you should purchase the book. Please purchase the book. This one is coming from our George Washington, Daniel Shippey. Hello out there on the West Coast, sir. Judge Quander, your research is amazing. How many years have you spent on this and where did your research begin?
Okay. Well, actually, when I was in law school at, Howard University.
Bison!
Yeah, go Bison. Go and make it sound. I went to my first Quanda reunion in 1968. The Maryland Quandas existed, Virginia Quandas existed. We were not by and large participating in their reunion, but I went to my first reunion in 1968, became quite interested in knowing more. I was in law school. And I started asking and picking up little pieces of information, writing it down, researching down the Hall of Records in Annapolis and the Fairfax County Courthouse Archive section. So I did this a little bit here, a little bit there. And people would say, come and talk about the family. Tell us about the Quanda family. We heard that they've been around a long time. Talk about Nellie Quanda, first national president, Alpha Kappa Alpha. So I said, this needs to be a book. But as an attorney and then as a sitting judge and then involved in a number of high profile community activities, et cetera, it took a long time to get around to it. I had all this paperwork. My wife is saying the paperwork was running out of here. So we were putting paperwork at Howard in the archives over there. And I said, enough is enough. So I had to just get it done. I'm 77 years old. And my wife said, if you go to glory, it might never get done. So now my concentration, the book has gotten done. My concentration is spreading the word so people will buy the book, make it a national bestseller. So everything about the Quandas is not in the book. You can't put so much in there. So the underlying documents, many of those underlying documents, speeches, various discs and what have you, are stored at Howard University. And I get invited, I was asked by my publicist on my book to list the speeches and places I've spoken since January 1st, 2020. And I stopped at 16 because Black History Month, Alpha Kappa Alpha, I'll tell you tomorrow, which is March the 26th. Alpha Kappa Alpha will premiere its film, 20 Pearls, the history of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. So they came to me and asked me to talk about Nellie Quanda, the first president. I haven't seen the film. I don't know what's in it, but that's an example. I did that in 2021, 2020, but it'll premiere tomorrow on Comcast and Infinity. And then the Tuskegee Airmen, they found out we had 3. They asked me to do that. I did that. That was last month. It'll air on Saturday night. And then one of my fraternity brothers asked me if I would do about the Quanda women in Fairfax County. So these 14, I think, these 14 events, there were 4 for Black History Month, they have generated from crescendoing from different things. It's not all about Kwanda's now. Some of it's about Black family and Alpha Kappa Alpha and different things that have been going on. And I sit on some boards here in Washington, D.C., and others I have been on and not on now. So it's been a very busy 77 and a half years. And may the next 77 be just as good as the first 77.
Oh my goodness. All right. Aaron Patrick asks, where do you do your research?
Well, when I started, there was no internet. There were no cell phones. This is called blood, sweat, and tears. There's no ancestry.com. So my time was spent in dusty records in, as I said before, in the Hall of Records, dealing with those big library books. You know the story. Those big library books in Annapolis, Maryland, going to the Fairfax County library, to the archives, which is some of it's in the library, main library in Fairfax, and some of it's in the courthouse, and talking to different people, going with a tape recorder. The Smithsonian came to me, and they did 11 interviews, and I did the other 30 some with my cousin Sandra Ratley. And that 850 pages transcribed. I got a grant from the Humanities Council to transcribe. And we talk about different things that happened during the Civil War and the intricacies of certain people. And like I have in here that so-and-so had 4 children, but I didn't mention that they also had some other children who died in infancy, because we only talk about those who live. So you pick up bits and pieces, and everybody has a story. And all of the stories are not as interesting as ours, and some are certainly more interesting. So this is our history. And you can do the same. As I said before, stumbling blocks into stepping stones into pyramids, and lemons into lemonade. So when they tell us no, because we can't do this because you're Black and no Negroes allowed, well, it's still an incentive, because you see they stood up, they spoke up, and they left that legacy to inspire us. My dad was very inspired by what the ancestors did, and I am of the same mind.
Absolutely love that. Read quickly from your book here. You said after leaving the Kwanda family reunion in 1968, you began asking questions of yourself. Who was I? Where did I come from? Who were my forebearers? And although I didn't understand it at the time, I had been bitten hard by the genealogy bug. I was eager to learn from my family history, and I quickly developed a desire to share the knowledge. Now over a 50-year quest. 50 years. That is absolutely amazing.
My wife tells me I missed my college. I was in law school, eventually became a senior administrative law judge for the District of Columbia. But she says if I started all over again, I should have been a history professor. That was my minor. That was my minor. But the history research didn't put bread on the table, didn't keep the roof over the head. It was the lawyering and the judging that paid the bills. So it was a blessing. And I have not, there's so much history. You have 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, etc. My mother's family were from Barbados and from Calcutta, India. I don't know anything about my Indian family. I've been there. I've been where they were from. I've walked where I said they walked the same places, but I just have names. I know nothing about them. But I've done a lot of my Barbados family history, and it goes back into Scotland and Ireland and other places. So it's a quest. It doesn't stop. I know Henry Louis Gates. He and I have a picture together in my other book. My daughter grabbed him, commandeered him in a restaurant in Martha's Vineyard and said, "You and my dad look alike." And next thing I know, we took a picture. So I have it in my Omega Sci-Fi book, a picture of me with Henry Louis Gates of Martha's Vineyard, because I wrote part of that this current book was written in Martha's Vineyard. Yeah.
Wow, goodness. This next question comes from one of our #1 fans, Scarlett Instad. She says, Judge Kwanda, on the subject of great books, do you mind sharing your top 3 favorites that you'd recommend for thus learning more about Black history during this era?
So I could promote all of my own books. But I'm going to be realistic. I think Caste by Isabel Wilkinson
Yes, I
which,
have that one.
yeah, I have a little drape behind me so you won't see the mess that's of scattering of papers right behind me. My wife won't let me go on if I don't put the drape down. And I've got
Yeah.
Cass right under there. That's one. And another
Yeah.
one I have right there called Separate.
Yeah. This is Cast. The Origins of Our Discontent.
Those books, that's it. But in addition to Cass, which is right here, which I read,
Yeah.
this book is a
Partway through
sleeper.
it.
This book here is called Separate. And the thing that's so surprising about it, I stumbled on it and got it as a used bookstore. And it's by a man named Steve Luxenberg, not Luxembourg, but Luxenberg. But the thing about it, this is the whole history of separate but equal. More separate and not equal.
Yeah.
And we often think of Brown versus the Board of Education, or we think about the Plessy versus Ferguson. But he starts with the separated railroad cars in the 1830s in Massachusetts. How many of you knew that all of that started back there? So this
I had no idea. Yeah.
I had no idea. And
yeah, I picked it up at Plessy.
City. This is the history here of Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
And it's a very, very good book. And I recommend all three of them very highly. And you see I have them right here. And of course, my favorite one about my Indian ancestors is the City of Joy, because that's set in Calcutta. My family's from Calcutta. We are probably, I'm not sure about it, but we're probably from the Untouchable group. So I work as part of my projects. I work with the Dalit community in India. I'm keynote speaker. I've been there, met with people. And my name, Rahul Amin, nobody asked it, but that's where my name comes from. It's from India. My grandfather, Muhammad Abdul Rahul Amin. Yeah.
Oh, that is beautiful. Yeah. The Untouchables, you can read more about the Untouchable community in Cast. So again, I highly recommend it. He greatly recommends it, but follow the man with the graying hair, because that's the sign of wisdom.
The colloquial term is the Untouchables, but the proper term is the Dalits. D as in David, A-L-I-T-S, which means the broken ones.
Yes.
And so I work with that community.
Definitely. Yes. And so you can see a lot of this race-based slavery was built on other institutions. And it seems like we kind of perfected it by the time, slavery entered into the colonies and came here, into America as we would have it. We definitely built on a lot of different things and everything. I don't see any more questions right now. That is great. Just to remind all of you viewers out there again, the book can be had at QuanderQuality.com. It's also available through the bookstores at Mount Vernon, at the shops of Mount Vernon. It's available through most booksellers, Amazon included. So just go out there and purchase and support and get to know more of our joint American history. Did you have a comment? Yes.
Just you order it through me. I'm not to put anybody else down. Yours will be personally signed.
Yes.
And it will be stamped.
You get the stamp, people.
I enjoyed this. Thank you ever so much. And anybody wants to reach me, you can also send me an email at info@QuanderQuality.com, info@QuanderQuality.com, or text 202-487-9922. Thanks, Brenda.
You're very welcome. It was nice seeing everybody. Bye, everybody. We'll see you on the next time.
Thank you.